hear noises. Does anyone here have a certain takeaway that they're hoping to get out of this evening? Is there some question that you have on your mind that you want answered? Because I give them prepared questions and then I go completely rogue anyway, which they all know at this point. So are there any specific questions that anyone has that we can make sure that we cover? Just based on even their little intro. Yes?
And what's your number one thing you wish you knew as a first-time author?
Love it. That is actually a perfect way to start. Well, who wants to answer that first? What is the number one thing you wish you knew when you started out?
Yeah, I think what I tell everybody is you are never done with the book. The book is never finished. So what you have to do is set a deadline and then just let it go. And it was the hardest thing to just let it go. And I didn't realize that that was going to be the case for me. Somebody gave me the Bob Woodward quote. We all know Bob Woodward.
Yeah.
He said, you never finish a book, you just stop working on it. And you have to wrap your mind around the fact that other people are going to work on it and help you with it and make it better. And you just have to finish. It's the hardest thing to do.
That's a great, yeah, that, and I think also that I think Jen, you said it's not you don't do it alone, and I think I was laboring alone for a long periods of time. I'd go to the library and I called it the damn book, everybody knew. It became my favorite phrase about it because I thought it was gonna be a lot simpler process. And then when I finally involved others in the process with me, they helped me get out of my own way. I was getting in my own way. So I think if I knew that, I might have asked for help sooner than I did.
Let me add that one of the people you should know or think about getting to know is a good attorney who specializes in copyright law. Because one of the issues I had moving from an earlier publisher with pictures of people who had influence and clout, of which Harriet Rose Job had none. But to make my point, I showed pictures of Warren Buffett, Oprah Winfrey, the Tony Soprano, a few others, The Godfather, and indicating that these were people in various pop culture areas that had importance and clout and people recognized them. So I had little pictures in my book. Well, once Jen and the Amazon people, the lawyers, started vetting the book, they said, whoa, we've got to make sure that you get clearance with these people. And I said, well, these are fictional characters, some of them, like Tony Soprano and The Godfather. But the answer is, there's no such thing in copyright law. So my point is, a good understanding, or at least a working understanding of some of the rules and laws protecting the people that originated the character of Tony Soprano or the character of The Godfather is important to know. And with connections that I received from Publish Your Purpose Press and getting lawyers' opinions, we were able to get through the vetting process that the book required whenever you have an image, and saving me a lot of money, because instead of showing the image of Warren Buffett or Oprah Winfrey or somebody else, I just created the industry and listed people who everybody knew and who had power in that industry. So it served the purpose. My point was always visual, so when I give speeches around the country as a consultant, I always had pictures for a few seconds on a PowerPoint. It's very different when you put it in a book, and somebody will find it and question you about it, so you got to be careful. So I wish I knew more about that, but I did learn a lot about copyright law.
This is why having a strong editorial team on your side is really beneficial, because if you're going it alone, you have no idea the risks that you're running into from a legal standpoint, and editors know that stuff. So regardless of what path you pick, whether you self-publish, hybrid publish, whatever you're doing, just make sure you have a good editorial team on your side.
Yeah, and to that point, surrender to the fact that you'll never get all the typos in the first or second edit. They just keep showing up. How did that happen? For me, it was about getting really clear on why. And so if there was one thing I could add to this great group of people for you, is take the time, invest the time, give yourself permission to take the time and answer why. Because when I got clear on why, the magic happened. For sure, for sure. And I think in following that, it was also about accepting, surrendering even to, it will be ready when it's ready. I get the deadline, I had a deadline too, and my deadline for the first book was deeply connected to my why. And so I have this powerful connection of the why to that, and it just, the combination of those two, I am sitting here having goosebumps thinking about it, because it really just, it was a game changer, for sure. And it took me a little while, but somebody gave me that advice. You're stuck because you haven't answered why. And I hope that helps in some way.
Love that. A related question. The number one question I get asked almost every single day is, how do I get started? That is routinely a question that I'm asked. If you want to just go down the line again, if you have just one thing that helped you personally get started in this process.
For me, it was, I had a speaking engagement that I had signed a contract and had taken a deposit for, and they agreed to sell books at the event. So that got me really fired up to start. I'm being very honest with you, it just forced the whole process.
For me, the writing down the chapters, sitting down, taking the time, instead of jumping in and just starting, which is what I was doing, like, I just, through some advice again, through some other authors, was I sketched the outline of the book chapter by chapter, starting with like the introduction, and it started to give me I changed the chapters over time, and it evolved from that, but just getting that down on paper really made a difference in getting started.
That's a tough question. For me,
Use the mic, because people might not.
For me, I've been speaking about HR and HR strategic positioning for years and years. And in fact, I've been using the character of Harriet Rowe's job in earlier speeches. I think it came to a head when I was asked to do a Disrupt HR session in White Plains, where you had only 20 slides. That was the only number you could use. And then whatever, it was 30 seconds a slide. And I had to come on stage and talk about who killed Harriet Rowe's job, which then was just a one-off PowerPoint that I had used. And I created the PowerPoint. It looked nothing like the book. It was more like a detective's notebook. But I had to do it, and I came up on stage with my Burberry raincoat and a detective's shield and a hat. And it was tough to do in 2 minutes and keep in sync with the slides themselves, because you have no control in a disrupt meeting. They're purposely like a mini TED Talk, but you really have 20 slides, 30 seconds each, and 5 minutes in front of an audience. But once I got that, the feeling was, oh, I could create an outline of not just the death of Harriet Rowe's job, but my previous presentations, and tie it all together in terms of the content and keeping her safe, and also finding out why she was targeted in the first place. And then I just wrote an outline of the various topics I was comfortable talking about, and some of the key materials I already had that I needed to shore up, build around, and create the story, and weave the story through multiple PowerPoints over the last 10 years of my speaking topics about why Harriet Rowe's job was found dead at her workplace. So it was a series of PowerPoints that then created the binding for a thread of who killed her, why, what was the motive, and then adding to it how to keep the audience who's reading my book safe as a strategic partner and what they should be doing. So it was fun. Well, it's difficult, but fun.
I agree with all of what they're saying. I did the chapter sequence, which changes many times. It's not the same sequence today as it was in the beginning, but then figuring out what are the stories that support that topic. So I did the chapter sequence and then thought, what are the stories? What are the key messages that go with this? What do I want to say about that topic? And that gave me some structure and helped.
Much of what they're saying, we have a blueprint. It's called our Getting Started for Authors Blueprint, which is a free guide that you can get from our website. I think Taylor has information in the back about it too, but if you text the word publish to 345345, which I will say again at a later point in time, that will give you the PDF download, and a lot of kind of the tips of what they're talking about are in that guide, because you don't have to do it alone. And we've worked with so many authors at this point that we've just kind of curated the best tips that can really just be the thing that kind of lights the fire to get you moving in the right direction. And I've already talked with a couple of people in the room who already have access to the guides and have commented of like, wow, that really will help. Taylor in the back will have a basket at some point to put your business card in, or if you don't have a business card, we have index cards that you can write your name on. that we have 5 printed copies of our Getting Started for Author blueprint that we're gonna raffle off. So at some point, probably a little bit later, we will do that. Okay, so let's switch gears, because we can talk about getting started all day long. I want you to walk away with the benefit and the impact of what it's going to mean when your book comes out. So, from a show of hands out here, how many here are business owners, entrepreneurs, solo practitioners of some sort? Okay, most of the room, which is not surprising. How many of you who raised your hand are either already speaking or would like to be speaking? Beautiful, because that's the line of questioning I would like to go down with you guys. Because I've personally witnessed growth and excitement, especially when I get an email from any one of you and you're like, I just got this thing, or I just met this person, I just got this speaking engagement. I feel like a proud mother where I'm like, oh my God, they're doing amazing things. And it really just doesn't get old. And I've also written 5 books. I'm working on a 6th one right now. And I've been in the same position that they're all into, where I've been able to go from maybe charging $5,000 for a speech to $10,000, to $15,000, to my current highest, which is $22,000, all from being an author. So if we think about that, let's talk just from a speaking standpoint. Is there one particular instance in your mind that you're like, wow, I don't know I would have gotten that opportunity had it not been for my book? Or, and again, I told you I go rogue, so you can see like the brain, the wheels are turning. I'm like, what am I gonna say? Start with you, lucky you.
Yeah, so I started promoting my book a few months before it came out, and I started dripping out the testimonials that were coming in, and I had some really well-known, high-powered people write some incredible testimonials for me. So that really drove a lot of interest, and it also was part of what drove the deadline, right? Because we had a launch date set that I was promoting. Once I started doing that and it was hitting all the social media channels and all the SEO indexing, I started getting a tremendous amount of inbound activity that wasn't, a 2nd or 3rd level referral. It was completely out of the blue, which was magic for me. At that point, I started quoting, one of the women in my book is a woman named Cindy Gallup, who talks about women in the advertising industry. My chapter on her, she's re-architecting the world of pornography, which is a conversation we can have when the microphone's not on if you want. But she has a line where she talks about women and their salaries, and she says, say the largest number you can say out loud without cracking up. And that's what I did. And I remember calling Jen and I was like, I just dropped this number and they didn't even blink. And Jen's like, well, obviously it was too low, right? So you can do that with a book as a credential, right? So part of what happens, I had done some big speaking stuff before this, but your numbers multiply. And it's not even the right companies with the right budgets and the right audiences start finding you. My topic right now happens to be super hot and in demand, so I stepped in a little bit of shit on that one, but it really, if you can time it with a news cycle or something that you see people are starting to talk about or that's bubbling under the surface, that will also accelerate your success as a speaker.
And whatever you're currently charging if you're speaking, just up it, even if you don't have your book out or even partially written yet, just up it. We have an author that we just started working with, and his book came out a couple weeks ago. And I was like, oh, what's your fee? And he's like, $2,500. I'm like, are you kidding me? And so I said, I want you, the next conversation you have, to say $7,500. And he kind of had like that knee-jerk reaction, like, oh God, I can't say that. And he did, and they didn't bat an eye. I'm like, you need to go higher. So even just, it's a lot of it's mindset, and a lot of it's kind of this mental game. But even if I forgot who, I think it was Eileen, when we were talking earlier, we were talking about having a cover and just starting to promote the hell out of it, even if it's not written yet. Like, that's what a lot of people do. So have your title nailed down, get your cover going, and then just start telling everyone it's coming, because now you're imposing that deadline. But it also gives you that opportunity to increase your fees. Whatever your consulting fee is, raise it. Whatever your speaking fee is, raise it. Whatever it is that you do, raise those fees. And because people are gonna see that 3D image of the book, and they're gonna be like, oh my God, there's Like they have a book, even if you haven't written the first word yet, it doesn't matter. As long as you're intending, obviously, I'm not saying be shady, as long as you're going to write the book, you're in good shape.
I agree.
Oh, I didn't know if we were going down that.
Are we going in sequence, or does it matter?
It doesn't really matter, we don't have to go.
I agree, but also a couple of other things I'd like to suggest. I had the luxury of having an earlier edition in soft cover with the same cover. And in my industry, it's very siloed in terms of human resources management. And most of the people that I know are software vendors like Workday, Ceridian, ADP, Ultimate Software. And I was pushing out, and I had the cover, and I was pushing out the fact that I'm a pretty well-known, quote, thought leader, and I have a book, and I want to speak for their user group meetings. And at this point in my life, I didn't care about my speaking fee as long as I was in front of a large audience, which would get me additional speaking down the road. So if a vendor says to me, Mark, we want you to speak at our user group meeting, we'll pay your expenses, pay your hotel, we'll set you up with book signing. And for the first couple of years when I had the first edition of my first book called Heroic HR, not from PYP, but I said, fine, I'll do that. Because the more, I never turned down a speaking engagement, by the way. Even at this point when I've been in front of thousands of people, but every time I take a speaking engagement, I want to make sure that there's at least a couple of hundred to 1,000 at a minimum, which who then might come up to me and say, we want you to speak at our group meeting or at this group meeting or another group meeting. But I look at it as paid marketing. And with book signing, also paid marketing. And I gave away a lot of books to people who are in the marketing function of software vendors because they run these big conferences. Workday Rising in my industry. It's got 10,000 people in Las Vegas. For me to get on their agenda might be a challenge because they hire George Clooney, Michelle Obama, and other people who are pop culture icons, and that's not me. But within that, they have other luncheon speakers and closing keynotes and things like that. So I've recognized that. So I think every speaking engagement that I do, yes, all my expenses are always covered. I look at it as the cost of doing business and paid marketing, and it gets me in front of a couple hundred to a couple of thousand people, and invariably, because they like what I have to say, and the way I say it, with this particular topic, with the detective story and all that, I get additional speaking engagements. That's my opinion.
And I was going to talk, I mean, just from a different, because I'm not a speaker, so my book wasn't written, I mean, I do speak, and I'd be happy to get more speaking gigs, and that's when I have time, I'll probably pursue that a little bit more, but my book was written with for a different purpose, so just in case you're not, that's not your purpose, if you're not on the speaking circuit, or you're a thought leader within an industry. Mine was written for the consumer, basically, so I've had great sales from the consumer buying the book, and then also directing them to the idea, I mean, I've started the Association of Professional Photo Managers, so I want people who get overwhelmed with their photos also to realize that there's resources and people they can hire. So that's been so in some ways I'm raising up the visibility of an industry that is new and didn't exist. So my purpose of the book was not only to teach what we call do-it-yourself, people that want to do it themselves, the process of doing this photo management, but also to raise up visibility and awareness of the profession. So then when I get calls, last week with the Washington Post is doing an article coming up, I'm able to, it gives a lot of credibility to the idea that to the readers, they're gonna write about the tips I give about getting their photos ready for their Christmas card or whatever, and then they're gonna say, if you can't do it yourself, then you can find a pro who can help you do this by going to this, by reading the book. So does that make sense? So it's a different purpose for my book, but it's also been significantly helpful for that reason.
Thank you for that segue, although we're going to come back to Dave in a second. But just thinking through of purpose and what you're doing, it's a very valid point, because there were people in this room who raised their hand about memoir. You can write your memoir, you can sell it all day long, you can still do speaking. So I wouldn't think of yourself as, I'm writing a memoir, I can't possibly be on a stage talking to people. Like even in a small environment like this, you could absolutely have opportunities. It could be a local B&I group that you can talk about your memoir within. But also we have authors who have written memoirs who are out just kind of like kicking ass and taking names on the speaking front. One of our earliest authors is a grief recovery coach. And so her story, her book is out there, you're welcome to look at it. It's called Cracked Open, Never Broken. And it's her memoir of a very traumatic past. And she used all of that traumatic experience to help other people in this world as a grief recovery counselor. So she didn't have to write a nonfiction book in order to achieve that goal for her. So it's about kind of thinking outside the box of what your intended impact might be for your book, because it doesn't have to be one of the things that we're talking about up here. It really, I say this all the time, when it comes to publishing, no matter what I tell you, there's going to be 7,000 opinions that contradict what I say, because there's just such a wide range of different options, and it's so much choose your own adventure of what kind of path you want to go down. Dave.
Well, I just wanted to say, if they had known about his video before they called George Clooney, you would have been getting
That's also.
Yeah. You could be selling copies of the video by the time I'm done. Yeah, the book helps with the speaking part of it. You know, people talk about street credibility and all that. That's a big part of it. It's a good way of getting the speaking engagements. It's a good way of having it as a takeaway. I just booked one a couple days ago where they're buying the book for everybody that attends. So it's going to probably be 150 people, so they'll buy 150 copies of the book. I gave them a little break on my speaking fee, but okay, 150 people walk away with my book. And my thinking is generally, because I'm conservative, 3 or 4 are going to love it. Maybe one of those will think I'm brilliant, and they'll be in a position to hire me to speak at their company. So that's how it works, you know. I like to just be practical about it. But yeah, it's a great opportunity. It's a terrific opportunity.
I like that you said that too, because one of the best experiences that I had is that I flew out to Napa Valley to speak at a conference that was aimed toward chief marketing officers specifically. And the books that I have written have been around LGBTQ leadership and business in the workplace. And so it was a 400 group audience, very small, very intimate, of all CMOs from every Fortune company. It was amazing and brilliant, and I gave my book away for free, I spoke for free, and I made like $50,000 worth of consulting and speaking on the back end.
Right.
So I think there's the phrase of penny wise, pound foolish. There's people who have written books that are very stingy with wanting to give them away. I am of the mindset of have them with you at all times and give them away to anyone that is a decision maker potentially, anyone who could potentially hire you, or there's just so many different kind of variables with that. And so yeah, it works. Just kind of continuing.
I call it the most expensive business card you'll ever hand out.
I agree, it's perfect.
Honestly.
It's street creds.
Yeah.
I'm an old New York, Brooklyn boy. It's street creds. It looks good on a LinkedIn profile. It looks good on your resume. It looks good on your speaker bios. It looks, even if the audience doesn't buy one, and you hand it out as a raffle, or you tell the person hiring you to speak, you want to donate to them 5 books, which they could raffle off. So it's 5 people in the audience that may not have walked away with any knowledge other than your name on an agenda, but now they have a physical copy and they can find you. And that's the name of the game. There's also a lot of ego involved, I think, writing a book and having it published. I refused to self-publish. I didn't want friends and family to say, oh yeah, Mark just published a book, but he did it himself using one of these crazy websites and paid somebody to print it. That's not what I wanted. I wanted a real legitimate publisher, and I got one. But that's my ego and my street creds, and I think that's important to me. And to have multiple copies of the first edition, which looks the same as this, it just wasn't as widely marketed or as professionally marketed. So I give that away or I sell it cheaply, and it still gets the same reaction, and it gets me more consulting and or speaking engagements.
I love it. All right, so who has questions here? I have plenty of other things I can ask them, but I want to make sure that we're delivering value for what you might be thinking sitting out there. Sharon.
I think I'm stuck in this place where, although I've had some great life experiences and made my way through the fire, who the hell wants to hear about it? And these people have something to market in terms of the subject matter. They're teaching something. But what about someone who writes a memoir? Where's the consulting in that? I'm just in that question of what you do with information that's personal. that you put out in the book, who wants to hear that, really?
Can I take this one? One of the best exercises that you can probably go through before you go any further on the writing is think about who your target audience is. So think about who's that prototype of the person that would likely buy this book and why. And then use that to inform the way you structure and frame the book and the way you tell your story. We all have compelling, crazy, brilliant stories, right, about our own lives and everything that we've come through. But when you really laser focus in on who and why someone would buy this book, that'll help you really create what's that 30-second story about why I wrote this book and what it's about. I don't know if that's helpful for you, but it's easy to sort of meander down. I mean, I could have had 30 stories of incredible women in this book, but when I really framed it very specifically, then it eliminated many of them, or it changed the way I told that story. I don't know if that's helpful for you, but.
Well, and I'm a one-woman business, so I'm constantly looking at who is my target market, you know, when I go to advertise or do different things. So I guess I've never really thought of it as being that I could turn that around.
One of the exercises I went through, and I'm stealing a friend's consulting model because he uses this with clients. He does what he calls the Wall Street Journal exercise. I apologize that my voice is scratchy, folks. I've been literally on the road for a month, so this is like the end of the road until next week. Just bear with me. But he says in 2 or 3 years, the Wall Street Journal is going to write about you and what you've done with this book and with this story. What do you want them to say? And that really defined for me, okay, how am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And what do I want people to get from this when they put it down, if they finish it, right? That might also, if you look to the future and then pull yourself back into the present, that might help you structure it differently.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would also say from a memoir standpoint, especially with memoirs, we're writing them because we have some story that was important enough to share with other people. So instead of thinking, and it goes back to the target market, instead of thinking of I'm writing for all of these different people, focus on one person. And what I encourage people to do is print out a picture of that one person. It could be somebody that you know, it could be somebody that's inspiring to you, it could be a random person that you found in Google. Doesn't really matter as long as you're writing for that one person. Because the more narrow you are and the more you speak to that one person individually, the better the chances that you're going to hit that right person at the right time. Because the reading process, while it seems like, wow, they're all selling thousands and thousands of books, yay, but it's still an individual experience, right? I'm still picking up a book and I want to be spoken to individually, not as a wide kind of mass of people. So if you kind of think of it that way, and to some degree, writing a memoir for some people is just cathartic.
This is what I was getting at.
Right? So it doesn't have to always have some business tied to it. Sometimes you just want to get it out there. And I'm working on my memoir right now. I'm flying to Florida to meet with my ghostwriter in 3 weeks to finish it up. It's already pretty much written. We're just trying to, figure out some details. And then I'm going to throw it over to my editorial team to have them kind of take it through the rest of the way. And I cannot begin to explain the amount of catharsis that occurs from just throwing it on the page. And instead of being frozen in fear of how is my story going to land with somebody else, just worry about writing for you.
Right.
Don't write for everybody else yet. That's why there's an editing process. That's why there's many stages of the editing process. Just write for you individually. And once you can do that and you're writing for you and that one person, that's when you can hire an editorial team that can really help you figure out where are the holes, what's missing, what needs to be filled out, what needs to be taken away. So it doesn't have to be operating in a silo, which I think a lot of times, myself included, I like to pretend I can do everything, and that's not accurate. So this is why we have a team, and it's really publishing and writing. Despite writing seeming like a solo sport, it's not. It's a team effort. Mark, did you have something?
You basically hit the point, especially on your, I've never written a memoir. I thought about a day in the life of a consultant and possibly writing something about it, and I felt the same way, and I might still do it. But for you, I'm thinking exactly what Jen said. if nobody buys your book, the process, I think, of you writing your own story and putting it in paper is going to help you mentally and physically as a person. And I think that's important. And the reason I'm saying that is I have a dear friend who's gone through a bone marrow transplant and is in isolation. And there's a website called The Caring Bridge. And these people write journal entries, and it's confidential, and she chooses who gets to read her journal entries, and it's all her close friends. It's not like on Facebook. And some of it is repetitive and very spiritual, and it's almost annoying to read. But people have told me, Mark, just let her do it. It's for herself too. It's not for us to read about how she's feeling every day after a bone marrow transplant. It's more for this woman to talk about, to do something to occupy her time while she's in isolation for a couple of months and possibly in danger for herself. So I think that's partly it in terms of writing a memoir. It's going to help you mentally and physically, whether you sell one book or give it to your family. You know?
And here's the bigger purpose. You've been through the fire. There's a lot of people going through the fire. And if your story helps one person,
Exactly.
what a gift that is.
That's a great
Don't give up. Laugh at that voice that tells you you can't do it. Laugh at that voice that says, who am I to tell this story?
What's the
You
downside?
have a story.
There's no downside. You're
You
going
have
to
a
write it,
story.
you'll print it, it'll be published. Somebody buys it, fantastic. Somebody doesn't, you still published it. And you made yourself feel
And the
good.
fear, it's reminding me when you, there is that fear, when it goes before it comes back to you and you put it out there, right? Like, what if everybody hates it? Like, you do have to, you walk yourself.
Trash.
Yeah,
I kept saying.
there is a very, you have to fight that demon in your head the whole process. It was surprising to me how much that was in my head but once you're done, it's out of your head, because you don't have to worry about it anymore. You finally did it, so I think that's really good.
It's called being human.
And one of the interesting things is that I had said at the beginning that I've written 5 nonfiction books. You would think at this point that somehow the process would feel simpler, but it took every ounce of my being to send an email to everyone who was collectively working on my memoir, some of which who are in this room, to just say, here is my commitment. I want to do this part of the process this time, just to get confirmations to make sure everyone's schedule aligns. These are all people that I work with, and I'm really relatively close to many of them. And I was frozen in fear by sending that singular email to like 8 people. So I share that because even for what may look like I would be free from that fear, it's like we all just have that fear. And I just sent that email like 2 weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago. So we're all kind of in the same place, and people who are standing on a stage and or on a podcast or wherever, and they're talking about how great things are and how they had no fear, it's all lies. Because the truth is what all of these folks here are talking about. If you can get through it without fear, by all means, but if you find that person, send them my way, because I would love to interrogate them. All right, do we have other questions? You and then you, yes.
I worry I don't have great writing discipline. I spend a fair amount of time actually writing what's going to end up in the book, a lot of time brainstorming and getting into the weeds, and I wondered if you could speak to kind of a good ratio between like getting deep into the weeds and brainstorming and coming up with ideas, and also what actually ends up in the book, and then how to kind of discipline, like strategies for discipline to where you're actually producing work that's going to end up published instead of these ideas that are fun to think about perhaps, but can kind of don't end up in the book.
We had planned for another author to be here, but he had to run at the last minute. He would have been perfect to respond to this because he was telling me earlier that he had spent like hundreds of hours researching, but not writing. So I'm gonna
I time boxed my calendar, and I would spend 6 hours every day at the Yale Divinity School Library. Beautiful place. If you have an opportunity to write there, please do. But I really looked at how much more I had left to put together in the book, like percentage-wise in the chapters, assigned a certain number of hours to those, and then to your point, I said, okay, I can research venture capital for 6 hours today, but tomorrow I need to write for 3. And you just have to stop. You have to really pull yourself in. And listen, I went down so many rabbit holes during my research, and there were fascinating things that I was finding out, but I had to have the mental discipline to say, this has nothing to do with the book, this does not belong in the book. Send yourself the URL and get to it after you send off the manuscript, which I never did. But, I mean, I sent off the manuscript, I just never went back into those research holes. But if you can, set timers and time box it, you'll probably be a lot better off. And then when you get the manuscript done, you'll see, okay, this needs a little more juice. You'll know that you're a little light compared to some of the other areas.
And there are a lot of writing tools. My favorite happens to be a program called Scrivener. It's Scrivener, but if anyone wants to email me or anyone else, or Taylor, we can provide you with the link and then a code that you can save 20%. It's like $40. It is the best writing software because it helps take, when you have just a lot of different ideas, you're not sure where to start, it gives you kind of a place to put everything in instead of, which I don't think any of you did this, but other authors have, where they have submitted their manuscript in 12 separate Word documents. We need one Word document, not 12 individuals. And so a writing tool can really just kind of help you put it all together and then organize your thoughts at the same time. Because one of the things that I jokingly say often is, we think linear, but writing is not. You would think that writing a book would be a linear process, and it's not at all. So you want to kind of go where your flow is. So if you're inspired to write something that you think is chapter 7, just write it. Don't start at chapter 1. Just write what is inspiring you in that given day, and that alone can be hugely helpful. And if you're working in a program like a Scrivener, where it allows you to have different kind of files, the best part is that I think we've all had this experience. You have a 200-page Word document. You have copied something from page 87, you have brought it up to 36, and you missed half the paragraph. And somehow you dumped the other half of the paragraph in a spot that you didn't intend. Now you have to undo, and you undid everything you just wrote. I have done this on a number of occasions. A good writing tool will help prevent situations like that, because ultimately we're all either professionals or entrepreneurs in this room. We have a lot going on. The last thing we need is to accidentally delete a whole bunch of stuff that just took us a painstaking amount of hours to put together. So I think having getting into a good writing routine and a good structure and having a program to support you can really be super valuable right out of the gate.
Also version control.
Oh,
Every time you end the day or end a chapter, save it with a long name, indicate what this version represents. New chapter added, pictures changed, something, so it'll remind you. And save it and then start the next section with a different version, so you don't go through what Jen just talked about. You could always go back to an earlier version and know at that point where you were, and then you can go forward from there. Also, one of the things that's cool, if you're working and you're writing part-time, I don't know if any of you are full-time writers, just keep a little notebook around every day to jot down brainstorms and crazy ideas that you thought about might be going into your book. You can always look back at it and say, nah, I'm not going to do that, but at least you have it down. So it's just a crazy idea.
I would sit in the car, because I spend too much time in the car, and I would activate the voice recorder on my phone, and I would just talk into it and then transcribe it. And it was in a document. Half of it, more than half of it probably was trash, but you want to capture those ideas, to your point. Yeah.
And there's definitely kind of research that shows that our brains, when we have that kind of empty space we're not sitting at the computer when we're in the shower, when we're out exercising, when we're driving, that's when creative ideas come. So if there's some strategy that you can kind of employ, that's awesome. And a lot of these tips that we're talking about are also started in that Getting Started for Authors guide that I had mentioned. There's a question up here, and I will, ask yours while an author is sneaking on the stage. Yes?
My question is about language, because I speak English for 30 years already, but because English is my first language. So when I'm thinking about writing a book, I'm torn, like, should I write in my language or English with some help, or where to start? And so.
It's a good question. So if you didn't hear it, she's asking what language to kind of start with. So I would go back to, I think it was Eileen's comment about target market and your target reader. And I have a PDF guide that I can send you if we have your email address that has a target market exercise that you can follow. But if your intended target audience is an English reader, then I would go with that one. If it's the other language, I would go with that one. And you can always work with a translation company that can help you do both. I think in your case, regardless of which language you do it in, you probably want to have an editor who's bilingual, who can kind of understand the nuances to make sure that you're getting the best quality in whichever language you choose to go with. Does that help?
Yeah, so where to go for? Like how do I know I choose the right bilingual editor? I mean, where to go from?
I think it's starting with that target market, and I will send it to you. If you come up to me after and give me a card, I will give it to you, and then we can talk again if you're still stuck. But I swear it'll provide kind of clarity of who is going to be the one that's going to buy this book. Because ultimately that's the end goal, is who's the target reader. Ultimately, we want to make sure that whoever that is, being very clear about it, like what languages do they speak? Or, is English the first language? Is Spanish the first language? Whatever it is, and just really kind of refining that further and further.
Jen, can I jump in even though?
Please, yes, can you,
Johnny come lately right now?
yeah, and you can answer this question. She's a great person to answer it. And then also you can talk about who you are and what your book is.
Oh, okay. So I'm bilingual Spanish-English, so where I am in my language acquisition process is that I now think in English mostly. And if I'm going to speak in Spanish, I actually have to translate what I'm saying in English in my mind and move it into Spanish, although
Exactly.
Spanish is my first language. So it's crazy how your mind works in terms of language acquisition. So I was most comfortable writing in English, but Jen and I have talked lots about whether I would translate this into Spanish eventually, because that is part of my audience and my community. But in terms of me as a writer, I needed to be able to write in the language that I felt I could most express myself. I don't know if that helps you, but certainly, and then you have the capacity to translate it into whatever you want to translate it into afterwards.
Exactly.
Yeah, as long as you can figure out where that starting point is, you can always work on translation. I think Kathy, was it Dutch that you were requested for yours?
Yeah, for somebody Dutch, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and we're working on a Portuguese translation and a Korean translation. So, Lord knows we're not the experts in this. We outsource to those who can actually do a translation properly. So Maisa is amazing, and I'm so happy that she arrived. And her reason for being late, as I said at the top, is that she came here, did an interview with me, and then she went and did a keynote speech, and now she's back here. So can you just kind of say who you are, your book, and what your book's about?
Yeah, so my name is Maisa Akbar. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I live in New Haven. And I wrote a book called Urban Trauma. And the book focuses on identifying what are the trauma characteristics that exist in diverse populations, particularly that live in inner cities or urban centers. And so, it goes into a lot of detail about that. But that's pretty much the book in a nutshell. And yes, I did just run from a speaking engagement all the way across town.
At least it was local, which
It
is
was local, so it was
right at the Pond House, which is
Yeah.
beautiful, and I feel like a universal alignment that we can make this all work.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking a lot about kind of like how to get started. We did some, chatter about speaking. So I'm just kind of asking people, what questions they might have, and just jump in as we go. Was there, I feel like 3 hands were up when I asked about questions before. Yeah.
So I'm considering writing something that has to do with memoir as well as I'm an artist and how my past has factored into my art. Right from the get-go, I was speaking to somebody who said, oh no, you've got to pick your genre right away because otherwise how are you ever going to market this thing? I'd just love to hear your thoughts on that.
So that's actually a really good question. Everyone here has a very concrete genre that they're in. However, we do have a book that falls into both. So it's fiction, but it's kind of like her memoir told through fiction, through the eyes of a talking cat. And so it's out there, it's called What Are You Waiting For? And it is such an awesome read. I remember just kind of reading the first draft for the first time and crying because it's just so good. And it's clever and it's funny and it talks about things like coming out as LGBTQ, around suicide, difficult relationships, all of these really hard topics that you would expect to read in maybe a more heavy memoir. But it's in this weird space, and I will tell you that it is hands down one of the hardest books for us to market. And we brainstorm over and over and over again, and we have not found that right lane for it because it doesn't quite fit in fiction and doesn't quite fit in nonfiction. So I feel like I would need a little bit more clarity on what you're talking about as it relates to kind of like your art and memoir, because for that, to me, it seems like there might be an easier kind of transition than the book that I'm thinking of.
I wonder if that just makes sense to talk to you later.
Yeah, please. Other questions? Who's got something? Yes.
I'm curious as to whether you have a strategy around marketing your books as hard copy or ebooks, and what's the difference? What are the considerations?
Anyone want to chime in before I dominate? All right. I like that it's a stumped question. So it comes down to your reader. It's all about your target reader always. So is your target reader an ebook reader? Is your target reader a print book reader? Do they want paperback? Do they want hardcover? There's a lot of different considerations. The beauty of working with a company that knows what they're doing related to your book is that you get all of it. So you shouldn't kind of pick one over the other. Like if you do a paperback, it's very easy to convert that into an ebook. And from a credibility standpoint, I don't think it wouldn't work for anyone sitting up here to just have an ebook. It just wouldn't work. So I would, and we can talk more. I'm happy to talk with anybody who's sitting here in more detail. But yeah, so I wouldn't it's not an either or, it's kind of a both and.
Jen, can I jump in too?
Yeah.
I also think that if one of the reasons I wrote my book is because I wanted to demonstrate my expertise in this area, which now people who book me for engagements are because they're interested in this topic. And so whenever I'm booked, I'm selling tons of books, like physical books while I'm there. And there's a different rate that you get whether you sell them, in terms of, so that always comes into consideration. And sometimes when we're booking an engagement, they might buy 50 books from, physical books. So I find, I don't know what the stats are, but probably more people might buy the ebook on Amazon if they get it from Amazon or, but if I'm speaking or I'm out in an engagement, they want the physical book and signed. That's like the big deal. Like, please sign my book, please, dedicate it to me. So.
And if you're a speaker or you're selling to a large group, you can still sell your ebook in bulk. There are tools and companies out there that can help you. And so instead of having to buy your book for $5 or $8 or whatever your book might cost, you can buy codes that are maybe $1 or $1.50. And so you can make a bigger profit margin in those areas. So if you're speaking to an audience where it's very clearly these people want ebooks, you can still kind of leverage it and use it that way and then raffle off the print copies. So we have a couple of authors who really kind of employ that strategy really well, but ultimately the majority of them are all doing kind of what everyone's talking about here, which is focusing on the print copy.
Just a surprise for me that I didn't expect when I wrote the book either is that I recommend different products, and so a couple of the companies that I recommend in this book actually package my book with their products. So they purchase, a number of books, and then every 3 months or so I get another order. In this one particular company, he sells his product packaged with the book. That's great. So that's been an unexpected benefit as well.
I've started building in a minimum book purchase into all of my speaking contracts too. So regardless of your audience size, there's a minimum buy in there, and we can negotiate that, but it's in there, and I haven't had anybody balk at it yet, so.
Yes.
How do you know as a new author that you're ready to start talking to a publisher?
You know nothing ever for certain. Nothing.
But what is the relationship? How does it start? How does it unfold?
Can I tell our story? Because I think that's a cool one. I don't mean to dominate here, but this is actually a really cosmic universe story. Is in my space, I launched my business in 2015 and I started following some of the really strong voices in my space just to see what they were tracking and what they were doing, and ended up meeting one of them, and she had published under Jen's imprint, and I said, okay, that's interesting. Then another friend of mine that I know completely separately, who I've known for 12 years, we were out to lunch, and she was like, you know, Eileen, with this business, you're eventually gonna write a book, and when you're ready, I wanna introduce you to this woman, Jen Grace. And I said, wait a minute, that's the same Jen Grace that published this woman's book. And so I said, all right, let's talk. And that's how you know when the universe collides like that. But it was honestly pretty magical, and I couldn't be happier with the end result of what we produced. But it was kind of cool that it came, you know, from two completely separate directions in my life.
I totally believe in what she's saying around, because every one of you, there's that story of the universe kind of conspiring in your favor, as maybe cliche that might feel, but like when you connect with the right person, and that might not be me or my team, and that's totally fine, but you're gonna start connecting with the right people, and all of a sudden it's gonna be like, oh, I just went to that, talked to that person, and then it kind of fuels in the back of your head of like, you were thinking about it a little bit, but then you met somebody, and now it's like, gosh, like I'm really thinking about it, and it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger until you take action.
I also, just from my experience, to somebody who recommended, I think it's called Author House or something. I mean, there's a lot of companies out there, and gosh, they pestered me with a million phone calls, and I knew, I had done Jen's writing academy, but I wasn't thinking that I was gonna hire a publisher. I was still thinking I wanted it. And then one day I just threw up my hands, and I think I called her and sent her a note. I said, Jen, I think I'm ready. And it was a great decision, because there's a comfort level. I think there's a lot of times you're dealing with people that, you know, it's just through email that you never see. But I think, not that I saw Jen much, but there is a personal, and her team, I mean, they're committed. And I don't know, my plug for a small business owner who is an entrepreneur herself, who's figured it out, is like a great, I mean, if that's who you are, then you're supporting somebody who is also that, which I think is important. So.
Thank you.
I think also, you know, part of my consideration was whether this was going to be academic writing. And I had published in, you know, research journals, and I had done a lot of academic publishing. And I didn't know whether I wanted to cross over to like whatever that other side was, right? And then there was a mutual friend that had heard my personal story, and they're like, oh my God, you have to tell this story. You have to meet Jen. She's gonna be, you know, she's gonna love this. And it was true, you know. But I will, you know, Jen will tell you that I fought her like quite a bit to not write academically, and she was like, you know, your story needs to be part of this, and you can do both. You can teach on something that's really complex and heavy and dynamic, and also share pieces of you in it, you know. And I didn't believe her for a long time, and then, you know, we got there. So I think it's understanding like the spirit of what you want to birth with this book, and then that allows you to kind of choose. And at the point that I knew that I wanted to share pieces of me, yeah, you know, Sage and all these other people who publish academically they're not going to be like, yeah, sure, Maisa, write about your personal story on that. So this was really the right fit.
Because ultimately you want to get your personal story out there, because there are academic publishers, there's academic books for a reason, but most people want to know about the author. Like, think of the last book that you read that had some kind of impact on you. Is it somehow tied to the fact that you feel like you know that author a little bit better? Because I know for me personally, when I read a book, and of course I'm a little more picky at this point, but when I read a book, I get really disappointed if I don't know anything about the person really early on. So that's one of our kind of guiding factors. And yes, there are authors who are a little more resistant to that, such as you, but eventually everyone comes around and there's still harmony. And again, this kind of goes back to having a good editorial team as well, to be able to, there's a very fine line to know how far to push someone without pushing them over the edge, and when to kind of pull someone back in when it comes to exposing their stories and really kind of, you know, sharing what they're writing about. Because a lot of times when we're writing something, it's coming from some place of, it could be like a traumatic experience, and that's not comfortable to write about. But ultimately the reader wants to see, oh wow, this person's the expert, but they've also gone through that fire too. And that's really important. And one thing that I encourage all of our authors to do, whether we've published them or they're through our PYP Academy, is if you are struggling at any point in this process, talk about that in the beginning of your book. Whether it's in a preface, whether it's an introduction, it could be your first chapter, just talk about it, because we want the reader to know that you are not perfect. It makes you more relatable to say, listen, while writing this book, I was kicking and screaming the whole damn way. Like, just be honest about that, and it really just kind of resonates and lands with the reader in a much more impactful way than if you were just like, I'm perfect, I'm great. Yeah. Yes?
It sounds like from the stories you're direct, so can you speak to the fact of whether you used an agent at all, and yes or no, and then pros and cons of agents?
None of you used an agent. We have one author out of all that we're currently working on his book who worked with an agent, and he tried and tried and tried to get his author some kind of deal, and it was just, it was not a good scene. So typically speaking, if you're working with an agent, oftentimes you have a big following. That's when a traditional publisher might be quasi-interested in you, is if you have 100,000 Facebook fans, or 1 million Instagram followers, or whatever it might be. That's when they're going to be interested, but that's also the time when you don't need them. So it's this kind of like, the whole publishing industry is based on bets. So they're kind of hedging their bets on what book can I publish, and is it going to sell me X amount of copies in order to be profitable for the bottom line? And I fundamentally disagree with that kind of mentality, because I think if we only operated with who has a big following, who's going to sell books, so many stories would never get told. And that's why there's kind of this whole landscape of publishing at this point, where you have the traditional publishing side, which most of the people who are traditionally published could sell just as many books and make more money on their own. And then you have the self-publishing side, where you are completely kind of in it by yourself in a lot of ways. And then there's this kind of beautiful middle where we land, which is hybrid publishing, where we're there to be collaborative. It's a partnership. At the end of the day, if one of them wants to kick and scream and say, this chapter needs to stay, or this story needs to stay, even if our editorial team disagrees with that decision, it's still a collaboration, and we're gonna say, okay, fine, we're gonna agree to disagree, we're gonna keep it, but when we do, we're gonna make sure that whatever we keep, we're gonna elevate and make sure that it's still providing that impact and meaning. And that's not the case in traditional settings, because they're selling your book to their audience. They are not selling your book to your audience. And that's a very big difference when it comes down to the opportunities that you're gonna get from a speaking standpoint or a consulting standpoint, or any other ways that you're trying to kind of encourage growth within your business. You first, and then you.
Have any of you created products that spin off of the book, workbook, or e-course, webinar, even in the front of a toolkit, downloadable PDFs?
Yes, we have. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure. We just actually got them, like, I don't know, last week. We created 4 training manuals. With urban trauma, you could see it that maybe I've identified the problem, and with the training manuals, I've identified the solution. So those just came out last week as a program implementation process. But I'm almost finished. I mean, like, really almost. I went back to the editor one more time. And that's a whole, like, we can laugh about that, how many times I send things back and forth to the editor. Jen wants to kill me. But the urban trauma workbook that will accompany this is coming next, and within the next few weeks. And so I was very thoughtful about, like, well, if somebody reads the book and they are a practitioner or an educator or somebody that works in the juvenile justice system, and they want to foster a connection and support somebody moving through, healing their urban trauma, how would they do that? What tool would they have to do that? Because the book doesn't do that. And then that's when the notion of the workbook came in. And I mean, I sell t-shirts, there's like, because I've actually trademarked the name Urban Trauma, which was something that Jen told me to do immediately. She was like, this is catchy, people are gonna want this. You need to hurry up and go trademark this. And now it's a federally registered trademark to me. And that was one of the smartest advice that she ever gave me, because I can't tell you how many people now try to do like urban trauma training. We're like, actually, no, you could call it something else, but you can't call it that, right? And so, so these are the pieces of knowledge that you get along the way that I think had I self-published or have done this by myself, I would have never thought like, oh, I should trademark this name. This is possible, right? And like that now I own it, right? In that way. So yeah, there's a lot of spin-offs that can come off just one product, and you can keep building on that.
And I want to point out a piece of clarification even further is that we're talking about having a workbook. So we are almost, or I guess done now with the VETS workbook. So something else kind of tied to this, but not specific to the book. But that's not just a workbook that you're going to pay $30 for or something like that.
No.
The way that it is built into this is it is a large scale program where these workbooks are included in that training program. So someone can't just go buy this workbook. They have to be engaged with her organization, and that is something that is included in it. So it can kind of go both ways. So like with the urban trauma workbook, it probably will be a lower price point where anyone has access to the how do we fix it, because the book talks about the problem, but it's not all the solutions. It's just kind of like, hey, we have a big problem here, and now here's this other product. And so then that leads into an online training program, which we've already discussed at different points in time. And it just kind of keeps, like, it's a ripple effect, it just kind of keeps going. So there are kind of differences within that.
And can I add something
Sure.
to that too? Because when I gave her the original manuscript, I had like the problem, the solution, the future, where this will be in 10 years, like everything. And she was like, so, right, we're gonna stop here for the book, right? So that's another piece of advice. It's like, because this is another product. This is either another, I mean, we spun off a second book that I'm working on now off of a 4th chapter that did not go into this book, because Jen and the editing team were like, that doesn't even belong here. Like, that's a whole nother book, And at first I was like, no, it's not, And then they're like, yeah, it is. And now I'm like, 80% finished writing that one too. So it's so cool to get that feedback, and to really challenge you to think about things that otherwise you would just dump in one bucket because you don't know any better.
It's beautiful. Okay, we had another question. Yes.
What's the process behind determining the price of the book?
Oh, good times. A lot of research. So we have authors who come to us and they're like, I want my book to be $18.95. It's like, all right, great. We will still do research to make sure that that book is priced properly, because if it's well underpriced or overpriced, it's not going to land well with your readers. So we do quite a bit of analysis to kind of just research the landscape. We ask our authors, what titles do you think are competitive with what you're writing? And then we provide our opinions, like we did this morning on a call with one of our authors who was cringing at the thought of pricing her book at $24.95. And she's like, I'm like, no, like our data is showing that you should start there, because you can always change your mind and go down, but you can't change your mind and go up. So there's just always, when in doubt, if you're thinking like, oh, what should I make my title? What should I do for this? Just look at what other people have done is usually kind of a good short answer to that.
I think that's appropriate. I think in the field of human resources management, there are certain people that I know as thought leaders that have a big following, that have a name. I'm not at that level, but I'm almost at that level, so I looked at all their books and what they're selling it for. Jen did the research as well, and we agreed on a hard copy price and a soft cover price, and that's fine. Like I said, I'm in it for the street creds. I'm not worried about the difference of charging $24 versus $26. As long as I'm competitive and people see that it's a good message, I'm happy. I think that's the bottom line. And I have to depend on Jen's people to do the research, and for me to look around and say, what does this person do? What does this person do? I bought their books, and they should be able to buy mine at a similar price.
And as I said before, it's collaborative, so if you disagree with all of our findings, it's okay. And if we see that we were incorrect, we'll change it. So it's not like it's not frozen in stone. So I think that's something that at least a few of you have experienced, where the book comes out and then it's like, despite having 5 editors, proofreaders, me, other people, friends and family looking at it, you still find a typo every now and then. And so we just address the typo immediately and move on with our day. Although I know Misa's like, yeah, yours was fun. There's always one.
Hold on,
Misa, you're the one on the
all
stage.
typos dead. It was my other publisher that edited second time, third time, and I'm still getting typos. Who's your editing team?
It's hard because
It was not Jen, it was the other publisher.
you'll feel this from an author standpoint, is that we talk about author fatigue because it's a thing. Where you are so tired of looking at your book for the 88th time, and at some point, I'm sure everyone's eyes, you start to read what you think is on the page and not actually what's on the page. And once it comes to life in print, all of a sudden, like your brain is sparked in a different way, and it's like, oh crap, I missed that one, or I forgot that one. And then we just fix it. Even one of our authors this morning, the same one who's cringing about the price, we asked her to, she just got her proof copy, and we said, all right, you just need to take one last pass. And just the look of like defeat, of like, I can't do this again. It's like, we're so close to the finish line. Like, we're really, really close. But it happens, and it happens to all of us. I remember with my last book that I published, it's called Beyond the Rainbow. I had, and I know Heather walked in at some point, so Heather edited my book, and there was one comment that she was asking in like the second chapter. It was like the smallest thing, and I sat on it for like a month because I was so overwhelmed by having to make one more change. And when I actually sat down to do it, it took me like 20 minutes, and I was like, I can't believe I wasted a month over this one comment. But like, again, we're all kind of susceptible to the author fatigue. And we have a very robust YouTube channel that has a lot of different videos on it. I've interviewed a lot of our authors. I've interviewed people who help support the publishing process to just give tips and tricks of, what can we do. And author fatigue happens to be a very popular video of ours. There was one more hand, I swear. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you make your money? Do you take fees up front or royalties or how?
Yeah, we're paid for services. So and this is a whole landscape, and I have another blueprint about this if you're interested. Actually, we're going to be raffling some of them off shortly. But yeah, we're a paid for services model. In the way that I see that, and there's a lot of publishers that kind of land in there, is that we're then beholden to their end vision. Because they've paid us and they've put their hard-earned money in us, and we need to make sure that we're doing right by them. And in other scenarios, there's plenty of publishers they're called vanity presses. You can certainly look into them. They'll take anything and they'll do very minimal to it, and then they put it out there and they're like, oh, why didn't my book sell? It's like, well, it's littered with errors, number one, and it wasn't done right. So that's how we operate, and then we take a royalty off of it, but it's a very small percentage because they've already invested up front. And for us, taking that royalty so we can just continue to support and find different ways that we can, get more exposure. Even, a good example of that is before we are sitting on the stage now, I had everyone, which was like wrangling cats, which I love and appreciate all of you, but I was able to get all of them here so we could do video footage. Because I wanted them to be able to speak to the camera about what their book is about, what their purpose is, what their impact is with the book. But then also, I want that footage for me, but we're giving that footage to them too. And that's no cost. So it's really about finding somebody who's really collaborative with you, because a lot of publishers are not collaborative. They want your money and they never talk to you again, and they just kind of like run it through their machine, which is a large part of why I started this company to begin with. Because I had a friend who was very, very much taken advantage of and ended up spending just shy of $200,000 to get her book published, which seems like a crazy number, and I'm not exaggerating. It was $181,000. Yeah, she happens to have
process though, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say the process of this, and forgive me for using this analogy for anyone that's experienced this in real life, but the proximity to a cancer diagnosis, in that you're thrown into this system and there are a lot of words and processes and decisions you need to make, and you don't have time or the resources to do all the research, so you never feel like you know fully what you're doing. Working with a partner like Jen and her team, because it's so highly collaborative, you build this trust, and you can say, I don't feel right about this, or help me understand what the implications are of this. Back to your question about the pricing, right? Pricing is part of your brand, but you can very easily overshoot on what you think your brand and your book should be worth, and that's where the team and the research that they do and their experience selling literal books helps you. So, again, forgive the analogy, but it's the idea that you're in this language and these decisions that you really need very good, educated, experienced support.
Amen.
I think what I'll say to that too is that, you know, I remember us having this discussion when we were looking at the price point for everything, and you were like, your first 2 speaking engagements will pay for this 10 times over. And this has been paid for like a million times, you know. I was telling her I have like over 20 speaking engagements just in the fall, you know, and we continue to set the bar higher and higher in terms of, so the book is a catalyst to marketing yourself, you know, and it provides that credibility that's needed to say you're an author, you're an expert in this area, you have agency around what you're speaking about, you know, because you're an author. So I will say that, and I think another thing to what Eileen was saying is just like, you know, one of the things that she told me when the book was coming out, I was like, hey, you need this to be an Amazon bestseller. And I was like, what? How do you do that?
I was hoping you wouldn't bring up Amazon. We don't have time to talk about Amazon tonight.
But that was a really good thing for me, right? What it did was like, it gave me this credibility around like, I became an Amazon bestseller, you know, and Jen just knows all the tricks on how to do that, you know, and we just gathered like the folks that needed to be put together for that to happen. So, though a lot of times this partnership allows for you not to have to spend time figuring out what that's about. You know, you just have to do your craft and your art, and that's it.
Could I just add one thing that's kind of a little bit of a divergence? Sure. We're talking a lot about speaking engagements, and I know many of you are very, very successful at it. You're not necessarily a born speaker. You have to also, I'm sure there are authors out there that have great books that when they're asked to speak based on their book, they're terrible speakers. So I think that you need to understand that it may feel like it's a natural thing to get up and talk about your book, but you have to do it in a way that's entertaining to an audience that's paying a fee to attend a conference that you're a keynote speaker at. And if you're a dud, they're not going to invite you back, even if your name is James Patterson, if you don't do a good job in terms of your content and how you connect with the audience, which is not an innate ability. You have to practice and know your audience and come up with some creative stuff and be engaging. And the book is the thing that got you in there, but to get more speaking engagements, you just have to be comfortable in an audience and be able to deliver your message coincident with the book, in my belief.
So I want to chime off of that and then take one last question. So what Mark is getting at, and I talk to people about this all the time, is consistency. Consistency of voice, whether it's your written voice or the verbal voice. So if you are a dynamic speaker and your book is boring, no one is going to want to hire you because your book is boring. They're not going to know how dynamic you are. Or the reverse, which is your book is amazing, you are dynamic, people are like, oh my God, I have to hire this person to either consult, to speak, whatever it is. And you show up and you are boring there's going to be an inconsistency. So I know that at least with Mice's struggle, it was your tendency to write academically just out of the gate. That's a conversation I have with a lot of authors where we are trained because of education that we should write in a very formal and specific way, and it has to be academic and it has to be well researched, and not to say you shouldn't have research, but we then get stuck because then it's not fun to write because it's boring. If we're bored by our own words, for love, like why is anyone gonna buy your book? So if we think about it from that standpoint, write how you speak. That's exactly how I operate personally, where if you read any of my books, you will think that you are having a conversation with me. And it's very intentional because it's very easy to write a book when you are writing exactly how you speak, how you think, and you're not trying to put yourself into someone else's version of what good writing looks like. So I would encourage people to just kind of double down on who you are and what your style is already. And then if you're like, wow, I feel like I'm engaging and my book is really boring, then you can hire a support team that can help you add some elements to it that might, help, bring up the elevation of what your writing is to start. One last question, yes.
So my question is around what you just said, to bring it up a notch. So I do have books published, and I started out with, like merchandise and other things to have it like a bundle package, but now I'm to the place where I wanna kick it up a notch. Some speaking engagements here and there, but they're mostly free to get my name out there. So what suggestions would you give to kick it up, a notch? Because most of my books are around like personal development, goal setting, etc. But to then speak and, you know, do other things to make it more elevated, I guess.
What is it that you feel is missing in what you're currently offering?
I'm really sitting here amazed, like, wow, I did this by myself. I think I need to be out there more, because I'm somewhat behind a computer. I have a writer's academy as well, that I started back in May, but when I say kick it up a notch, I mean like get more speaking engagements, paid speaking engagements, sell more books. I have books in the car, I sell books online, but to just kick it up a notch, I guess that's what I'm looking to do.
You're making me think of my dear wonderful wife who would say, "You're not telling your story behind the computer." Because I'd be on the computer being, I'm really productive, You're not telling your story on the computer. Get out there, you gotta get those speaking gigs.
I think social media,
Yeah.
a website, and be aggressive and be pushy.
Okay.
You put out a LinkedIn profile saying, I am a keynote speaker, this is my topic, here's some pictures, I am available for anywhere in the United States or overseas, and don't hesitate to say, contact me, let's discuss. What's the worst that happens? Nobody responds, but.
The thing that I've been doing is I'm continually building my list. So I have a huge subscriber list. And so I have a download. In my book, I have 53 tips to make the workplace better. You can download it for free, but you have to give me your email address. Well, hold on. So I'm building that list, and then I'm marketing to that list on a bi-weekly basis with either thoughts that I've had, events that I'm attending, something I'm promoting. So I mix up the message, and I have, again, now that the book is out, my list has gone bananas, but I think that's, if you want to establish yourself in a space, building your list by doing things like that. And then I republish on Medium. I get a lot of hits on Medium. I republish on LinkedIn with a link to the article on my site. You know, there are a bunch of different ways you can cross-pollinate, but I think building your list is probably your best strategy right now.
Also, sit down and say, who's my top competitor? One or two people. Go to their websites, see what they're doing, copy it. They don't have your name, use your name, and just do what you think fits well, and know that what they're doing versus what you're doing. If anything's missing, try to duplicate it.
I think also like being selective about what you will do for free. You know, that was a huge conversation that we also had as a team. And, you know, sometimes like you have to establish your value. And there are times where I will do free speaking engagements, but I'm positioning and angling all kinds of things, like who's gonna be in that room, who can potentially book me, and how many can I get, who am I gonna network with, you know? So it is for free, but it's targeted, and what I've decided is that the ones that I do for free are because that's my gift to the community, not because you've asked me to do it for free, you know? And so I just changed the way that was positioned, like could you, no, that's my gift, and then everyone else gets charged, you know? And so I think that also could be helpful in terms of you being selective about like, what is my strategy if I'm doing this? If I'm giving of my time, of my knowledge, of, you know, of me in this space, what is the end goal, right, that I want to receive out of this?
And there's a marketing advantage to this as well, because then you can talk about your paid speaking, and you can say that for every X amount of speaking, you know, engagements I do, I do one pro bono, or whatever it is, to give back, because the commonality among everyone, and I'm assuming everyone in the room, is that there's some higher purpose that you're feeling like you're called to do, or community that you're called to serve, or story that you are compelled to share, whatever that iteration is in your mind, you have the opportunity to stand in front of a room and, give it, lay it all out there as if you were getting paid $10,000, but know that you're doing it because you want to create impact, and you don't want to get too far away from the original reason why you started doing this. So I think that's a great.
And also be prepared to walk away. If somebody says, no, we don't pay our speakers, and we won't even pay mileage, and we'll maybe pay for one hotel night, you say, thank you, no, that's it,
And that'll happen a lot. That is definitely, we all get that. And let's have a side conversation about releasing a second edition or of whatever it is, because that also helps from a marketing standpoint. Okay, well, before we get kind of chaotic and all up from our seats, did everyone put their business card or a index card in this basket here? No. If not, okay, I'm going to attempt to not fall as I'm talking to you. Let's see. Thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, Tony. Come all the way around. Everybody in? Everybody in? I feel like, I don't want to say Jerry Springer because that's a bad reference, but like a talk show host walking through the crowd. Oh, okay, we're writing our names down. Good, good. Let's not break out into chaos yet. So we are going to raffle off 5 books. Oh, all right, I'm almost there without falling. Thank you. I've now lost the basket. Oh, should have been on this side the whole time. It's much less bright. All right, so I'm going to raffle off a few things. Number 1, and I'm going to have Taylor be responsible for that in a couple minutes. So we have our blueprint that I was mentioning before. It's our Getting Started for Authors blueprint, which is this side. And then we also have our book cost blueprint, which is this side. So this is a free PDF. So it's not, it's nothing like super exciting, but we decided to try putting it in a print version and see what happens. So we're going to give away 5. And then we're also going to give away 1 admission to our PYP Academy, which costs $2,500. And our next session starts on Friday of next week at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And if that's not a doable time, we can certainly talk about other sessions that will be starting in the fall and winter.
So who asked the question about jump-starting the process?
Yeah, right? So just a quick note about the PYP Academy. It's a 14-week program. We do it online, we do it on Zoom, and we walk people through the start to finish of what it takes to get the idea out of your head and onto paper. It's, as we've all kind of talked about, it's not a solo process. We really need to be focused on the strategy, which I think is the biggest piece, is how is this strategically helping us? And so there's a lot of information about it, and I think Taylor was, or is at some point, handing out flyers that have information about it. So I'm happy to talk to anybody. Taylor can certainly talk to you as well. I want to make sure that we can answer any specific questions that weren't answered up here tonight. So I'm accessible. Oh, we got one more business card. Let's get it in.
A piece of paper.
All right, whatever it is, piece of paper, carrier pigeon, send it down. I really should have stood here all night. I can see. All right, so I'm gonna have Taylor just start pulling out cards. Or actually, you know what, there's 5 of them, let's have each of them pull a card. Fun, look at us. Fancy pants up here.
Was this helpful for you guys? Did you learn stuff? Was it interesting?
Thank you. All right, Lisa, who do we have?
That Jen pulled this off is what's really amazing.
That's amazing.
It's
at the Mark Twain House, no less.
It's a cool place to be.
I agree, and I would like to just clarify that every one of them has said Jen this whole time. It is not just me, it is a team of amazing people that are able to pull this off. I alone would not be able to do any of this, so it is not a solo sport up here. All right, who do we have first? Okay, so Joe, I think this might be your card, even though your name's not on it.
Good card, Joe, without your name.
Joe? Oh, is this your card? Why isn't your name on this? Come on.
It isn't?
No, you're lucky I know you. This is your card, right?
Yes. Thank you,
Ask
thank
me to
you.
pick up something from the grocery store and I won't remember, but I know his card. All right,
Thank you, Jen.
you're very welcome. Next, Dave, who do we have?
What are they winning?
They're winning our Getting Started for Author Blueprint and / Book Cost Blueprint.
Great, I have Bob Sawicki.
Bob, all right, Bob.
There you go.
And then we're saving the big one for last, so don't leave the room. There we go. I like it, all right. Mark.
I have Ruth Ann Hebert.
Ruth, all right, Ruth. Love you, a cheering gallery up here.
Oh, yeah, we should.
Kathy.
I have Tony for.
Oh, Tony.
Thank you.
Say it. I'm not pronouncing it right.
Neither am I. No, Filiolo.
He's not lying. He was actually one of the first people I worked with prior to having a publishing company helping him with his books.
And she's amazing. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
Volume 1, I worked on Volume 2, and now we're working on Volume 3.
Yeah, we're republishing them now. We are working on
Yes, we
second
are
editions.
working on second edition.
And we have the New Haven Pet Sitting Company.
Gina! Yes, oh, good. All right, yeah, let's throw them in for the big drawing. All right, I'm getting winded up and down the stairs. All right. All right, let's see. Let's hope the universe aligns for someone. I love all of you. All right, who do we have? Kim Crowley.
Yay!
Yeah, this is amazing. All right, so I'm
If
going
it went to one of you that didn't say
to
anything.
give you that as a placeholder, and we'll have a conversation. All right, you want me to keep your card, because that would be helpful.
That's great.
All right, well, how exciting, sweet. All right, so as I mentioned, we do have a session starting next Friday. If anyone's interested, we have them running a handful of times kind of throughout the year. Where I'm happy to talk to all of you on an individual level. I say this all the time. My #1 goal as a publisher is to protect aspiring authors from getting taken advantage of in this industry, because it is brutal and I don't like it. Even if you're not going to work with us, totally fine. I still want to make sure that you're working with the right partner. Do you have something? Oh, picture. All right, so that is everything. Thank you all so much. I love you all. I'm so happy that you came.